So the HyperPod 14 is a new lens mounting system for this camera lens, the Rokinon or Samyang 14mm lens. What this system will allow you to do is attach this lens to either your star tracker or your go-to mount to be able to track the night sky for long exposure astrophotography. This system will also allow you to attach things like an ASI Air, a guide scope, and even an autofocuser. So this system is fully designed and 3D printed by myself. I've been working on it for the past few months. It was pretty challenging at times, but it was possible, and I ended up with a very nice final product. So the HyperPod 14 comes in two different versions, the basic and the EAF version. The only difference between the two versions is the EAF version has the actual mount and rings and adapters for an EAF autofocuser for the lens, but both versions come with the two mounting rings, two guide shoes for a guide scope or ASI Air. It comes with two of those, and then it comes with a 6-inch dovetail. It is 3D printed, really strong, and it can be mounted onto a star tracker or a go-to mount. And also you can use any type of camera that you want. If you have the actual like DSLR or mirrorless camera going on the back, or an astro camera, either a one-shot color or a monochrome camera, they will work depending on where you actually position the dovetail. So you can rotate your camera in any position with the dovetail, and I can show you how to do that in the assembly. I'm gonna show you how to assemble both versions. So I have timestamps down below, so be sure to skip ahead to whichever version or step you're on. Let me know if you've gotten this or if you actually would like it, and if you have any more questions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the assembly. Okay, so here are both of the versions of the HyperPod 14. I have the basic version and the EAF version. So I am going to start with the basic version. If you have either of them, timestamps are down below. You can go ahead and skip to whichever one you need. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so in the box, we're gonna have some packing materials, and then you have the actual goodies. So you should have a bag with a lot of different parts in it. We'll take a look at this in a second. We have the two rings, one that says Thinkable Creations and then one that says nothing. The one that has the words on it is gonna be the front ring, and then the other one is the back ring. Okay, and the last thing in the box is the 6-inch dovetail. Okay, so we can go ahead and open up this baggie next. So you have two baggies with parts in them. One is the assembly parts. These are the ones that we're gonna use to actually assemble. And then we have a bag of spare parts just in case you need them. All right, another thing I wanted to talk about was the tools. So I include the hex key that you're gonna need to actually assemble the entire system to the dovetail, but you are going to need to supply your own screwdriver with a Phillips cross end for most of the assembly. So go ahead and go grab your screwdriver. Okay, first step is to grab both of the rings. Again, the one that says Thinkable Creations is going to be the front, and it's going to face the left with this black knob facing the ground. So you can just put it flat on the table like that. And then the other ring is the back ring, again with this knob facing down. You're gonna put it just next to it. Next you're gonna take the guide shoe, just one of them, and then it doesn't matter which side you position it. I like to face it to the right. So put it on top, lining up those holes, just like that. And then inside the assembly parts bag, you're gonna grab one of these Phillips head screws, just like this. You're gonna grab two of them. They're gonna go right on into those holes. Okay, so when you're actually screwing all this down, this is all plastic, so try and be a little bit gentle. It is made as strong as possible, but still you can damage it by over tightening, so tighten it all the way just so it's secure. Okay, so we have the first guide shoe on there and screwed in, so that kind of lines everything up. Next you're going to rotate it over, and I mean you could use this spot. This spot is really meant for the EAF mount. So you could mount the guide shoe here, but I tend to use these other holes for the other one. So again, you take the guide shoe with one of these Phillips head screws that comes in the bag, and you want to put it on either end and screw them down. Okay, now that we have both of the guide shoes mounted on, we can actually attach both of the little thumb screws. So these actually go on the side of the guide shoes, so you can attach different things like a guide scope or ASI. Okay, so now that we have those screws, we can move on to the last step, which is attaching the rings to the dovetail. So depending on what kind of camera you're using, you can attach it in a couple different ways. So there's two sides, two long oval holes, so you can attach it right in the middle like this. This will allow the system to have better balance, but if you have a big camera at the end that you want to be able to rotate, it's probably going to run into this dovetail in this configuration. So if you have a big camera like a monochrome camera or a big DSLR, it's going to be right about here. So if you want to rotate it all the way around, it's going to bump into this dovetail. But I designed it so it will fit on the edge like this. You'll have less options for actually balancing, but this whole system won't weigh that much anyway. So this would be a fine way to do it. So either way, you're going to tip the system around. I like to set it on this side. Hold the dovetail so you can see those two threads down there. Take the last M6 screws, and I like to screw them in just a couple times to get them in line. And then you take the hex key and tighten them down. Again, don't over tighten them because it's probably going to damage the plastic, but tighten it down until you feel safe. And then when you actually tighten these screws down all the way, leave just a little bit of room so you can slide it back and forth. Also, the rings will flex just a little bit. You want this to happen until after we mount the actual lens in there, and I'll show you why that could be a problem if you don't. So now the last step is going to be to mount the lens. So grab the lens with the front facing left. I'm gonna open up the rings by unlocking the knobs, flipping them up. And then when you actually open the rings, if they are really stiff, don't force it. All you gotta do is take your screwdriver, unlock these little hinge screws, just literally a quarter of a turn, just a little bit to loosen them up. So then you're able to open it up. So now we can take our lens and then put it in there. You'll notice where it actually is supposed to go based on the little grooves in the side. So I'll zoom in so you can get a really close look. Okay, so the little ridge of the lens goes right along that track, and then the actual ring goes right in there. When you have it lined up, then you can close the rings carefully, and you might need to jiggle it in place just a little bit. Fold it down, make sure everything is lined up, and then you can tighten it down as far as you want. Okay, now just to double check, you won't be able to adjust the f-stop when you actually have the lens in there, so do that before you put the lens in there. And then focus, you should be able to kind of get in there and focus when it's like this, and you should have enough room to take the included lens cap on and off. It'll just go to the edge. And then once you have all that done, I'm going to go ahead and tighten down these screws until the dovetail does not move anymore. Alright, so now is the time where you attach this to your go-to mount or your star tracker. You add your guide scope and your ASI Air, you attach your camera, all the cables, and you go out and get some amazing images. So that's the end of the assembly of the HyperPod 14 basic version. Be sure to like and subscribe and share your images with me on social media, and I will see you guys next time. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on the EAF version assembly. So right away inside we have some packing material with the lens gear. Then we have the two red rings. So the one that says Thinkable Creations is the front, and then this other one is the back. Then we have a bag with a bunch of different stuff in it. We'll go over this in a second. We have this piece. It's the EAF mount, so the EAF autofocuser goes in there. And then you have the dovetail. All right, in this little baggie is a bunch of different things. So right away you see this red gear. This is the EAF gear. And then you have these two black pieces. These are the guide shoes for a guide scope or ASI Air. Next you have a bunch of little baggies with different parts. So these are your hex keys that you're gonna need. Another thing on tools, I include these, but you're also going to need your own Phillips head screwdriver. And then you have two baggies, one with spare parts just in case you need them, and then the actual assembly parts which we're going to be using. Okay, so first step in the assembly is to take both of the rings with Thinkable Creations, the front one facing the left with this knob facing the ground. Just put it flat on the table. And then this one, again with the knob facing the ground, right behind it on the right. Next, you're gonna take one of these guide shoes. I prefer to have the metal inserts facing away from me. So just on the top like that, with those holes lined up with the threads. In the assembly parts bag, you're gonna get out 2 of the Phillips head screws, and you're gonna go put them right on the top, and with your screwdriver, go ahead and screw them down. I've designed these parts to be as strong as possible, but then at the end of the day, this is still plastic, so don't over tighten. Obviously tighten until it's secure, but don't over tighten it just to not damage the plastic. Okay, now we're gonna do the same thing on this far end. So we're gonna take the guide shoe, take 2 more screws, put them in the holes and tighten them down. So once we have the actual guide shoes attached like this, we can go ahead and attach the little thumb screws into the 4 holes. These are gonna be what holds your accessories on here. Now that we have the guide shoes done, the next step is to actually assemble the EAF. Okay, so you want to take your EAF autofocuser and have it ready. So this is the EAF mount. You're going to mount it like this with this big side facing the front with thinkable creations on it. It lines up with the holes, so you just use the Phillips head screws again to secure it down. And here it is kind of nice to screw this one down because I find it's kind of loose if you don't really tighten it. Okay, so we have the EAF mount actually on there. So now we put the EAF with the kind of shaft on the bottom like this. We put it through that little notch, and you'll see these 2 holes line up. This is where we would take these smaller screws that are left, put them in there, and then screw them down with the smaller included hex key. Sure it's nice and secure. And then now the EAF is mounted. So the last thing for the EAF is to attach the EAF gear. So the small one. So you notice on the EAF, one side of this is flat. This is where we're going to be looking for this next step. So find that flat side, whichever way it's rotated. And then on the EAF gear, you'll see this little screw there, and then this hole. So on one side, the screw is going to start sticking out. That's where we actually line up that flat side of the EAF. So in order to get this screw to stick out just a little bit more, you'll have to either screw it tighter or looser, depending on how much it sticks out. So you want to line it up whichever way that flat side is facing. And you should feel that it kind of catches and has some resistance. It doesn't just spin all the way around. If it does, just screw the screw down a little more. And then you push it as far as you can. So there should be a little gap there between the EAF gear and the EAF mount. So then you just go ahead and very carefully tighten this screw until it's tight on there. So the screw does not pop off and it doesn't go anywhere. There should be just a tiny bit of wobble. That is normal. All right, so the EAF is fully assembled. So the next step is to attach the dovetail. So you want to take the 6-inch dovetail, and depending on what kind of camera you're using, there's a couple different mounting options for this. So the simplest is to just mount it right in the middle like this, one on either side. But if you have a big camera, so like a monochrome camera or a big DSLR, and you want to be able to rotate it afterwards or whatever rotation you want, the camera is going to run into that dovetail right there. So you can mount it all the way on one side so you can mount whatever camera you want on the back. So I'm going to do just the middle version. You choose whichever one you want. So you put the dovetail right on there so you can see both holes. Take the last 2 M6 screws, and I like to put them in, screw them in just a couple times. Okay, so we want to make sure that the screws are not tightened down all the way, so you should be able to still rotate the dovetail just a little bit, but it's still secure enough. Now this is so that the rings have just a little bit of flex in them so that it lines the lens up properly, which is the next step. So you're gonna grab your lens and we're gonna attach the lens gear. So I like to just put it flat on the table, and then you're gonna take the smaller hex key again. You see these 2 screws with the arrows. There's 2 little holes right here. So you put the hex key in there and loosen it up to detach the 2 halves. Okay, so keeping the screws in there, if they fall out, just put them back in. You want to separate them and then attach them just like this, and then screw them in, and you want it to be right about the center of this actual focusing grip. So you want to line that up and then screw the screws in. Okay, and then again, don't screw them in all the way 100% tight yet, because we want to make sure that the lens isn't cockeyed. So like this one, mine is. So you want to just straighten the lens gear out when it's not too tight on there, just so it's flush all the way around as much as possible. And if there's a little bit of a misalignment, just line it up. And then you'll be able to fully rotate it around with the lens gear. Okay, so now that we have the lens gear on, we can attach the lens inside of here. So undo both of the locking knobs and flip them up. And then when you actually try to open the rings, if they're really tight opening, don't force it. Just go ahead and take your Phillips screwdriver and loosen these hinge screws just a very tiny bit, just so you can open them so they open really nicely. Now you're gonna take the lens, and you see these little grooves on the rings. They actually line up with different parts of the lens. So on the front, they line up with that little groove right here, and then the back, it sits right on top of the f-stop. Again, before you actually close this, you can't adjust the f-stop after you do it, so adjust it and then you can actually close the rings. So with everything lined up, close the rings. And you might have to jiggle it back and forth. So the reason why we didn't tighten this dovetail down here is we might need to separate these rings and adjust them so that it closes properly and grips the lens good. So then once we are satisfied, we just close down these knobs, and then it should not go on top of the lens cap. You should still be able to take it off and remove it and just be right on the edge of that. Okay, so once you have the rings closed around the lens, we can take the hex key and tighten down these bottom screws. When you close the ring system down, you'll notice these two gears intermesh. There might be a tiny bit of play in the actual lens, which should be accounted for in the backlash settings. I don't know the exact numbers, but you'd have to fine tune it and just test out a couple numbers just to see. But that is pretty much it for the assembly of the EAF version. So now you would attach your camera, guide scope, ASI Air, all your cables, and then you can actually go and image. And speaking of images, whatever you guys take pictures of, be sure to tag me on social media and let me know how you like your HyperPod 14. I would love to find out. If you guys have any questions, be sure to leave them down below. And as always, I hope you guys are having a great day and hope you all have clear skies.